This weekend, is Memorial Day weekend. I can't think of a better way of remembering our fallen defenders than in learning more about leaders in peace. Today is our 6th Sunday, continuing our look at Great Peacemakers, true stories from around the world. One of our peace leaders this morning is well known, the other not quite as much. We hope you enjoy learning more about these two leaders this morning. Much of the dialogue about these leaders is taken directly from the book. Barely escaping the Holocaust, Dr. Riane Eisler asked herself, quote, "How can human beings be so brutal to their own kind? What is it that chronically tilts us towards cruelty rather than kindness, towards war rather than peace, toward destruction rather than actualization?" The answer, she discovered, was society's habit of choosing domination over partnership. Explained in her best-selling book, The Chalice and the Blade, Eisler's findings are revolutionary in their power to alleviate a vast array of social problems. In 1931, Riane Eisler was born in Vienna, Austria, to affluent Jewish parents who gave their only child a carefree childhood. Sadly, her untroubled days came to a screeching halt one night in 1938. A night known as Crystal Night, because so much glass and crystal were shattered in Jewish homes and synagogues. That night, suddenly, a gang of Nazis banged on the Eisler's front door yelling "Gestapo" and burst into their home, shoving her father down the stairs and dragging him away. Courageously, Eisler's mother followed them to Gestapo headquarters, where she paid to get her husband back. After that night, young Eisler knew that she was no longer safe in her country, remembering, quote, "Overnight, the hunting and the killing of Jews had become legal in Austria. I went from being a little girl who people on the street patted on the head to being an enemy of the state," unquote. Running for their lives, 7-year-old Eisler and her parents managed to flee to one of the only places that was accepting Austrian refugees, Cuba. From overhearing her parents' whispered conversations, young Eisler learned that she and her parents had barely escaped the Holocaust. Discovering that most of her close relatives were among the 6 million Jews murdered in this unthinkable tragedy, Eisler vowed to do something significant with her life to justify that she had been spared. 7 years later, in 1945, Riane and her parents emigrated to the U.S., initially arriving in Florida and ultimately settling in California. Experiencing the pros and cons of Austria, Cuba, and the U.S., Eisler gained two valuable insights. Quote, "I learned that what people consider just the way things are is different in different places. And I learned that not every cultural tradition should be preserved. We should ask if a cultural tradition promotes cruelty and abuse or caring and respect," unquote. After earning a degree in sociology, Eisler married and had 2 daughters and began living a typical suburban life. Unfortunately, she and her husband were ill-suited and for each other and divorced. The determined single mother raised her daughters while earning a doctoral degree in law and then working as a family attorney and women's rights activist. During this time, Eisler pushed herself so hard she became seriously ill. Her illness prompted her to make major changes to her diet and lifestyle, to give up practicing law, and decide what to do with the rest of her life. She said, quote, "There was a time when I didn't even want to think of all the injustice, violence, and suffering in our world. I told myself that there was nothing I could do about it anyway, and it was too overwhelming. My personal life was more than enough for me to deal with. Then I began to realize that many of my personal problems were connected with social problems, and that whether I liked it or not, I had to address both," unquote. Trading the courtroom for the library, Eisler embarked on a 10-year quest to answer profound questions that were rooted in her experiences as a child in Nazi Austria and had haunted her for years. Questions such as, why do we hunt and persecute each other? Studying over 30,000 years of Western history and research of scholars in anthropology, archaeology, sociology, and other academic fields, Eisler made a profound discovery: two opposing models for molding and organizing relationships, which she called the domination model and the partnership model. These models transcend familiar categories, such as capitalist or communist, religious or secular, Eastern or Western, technologically advanced or primitive, and they shape the very essence of a society. Looking at some of the most brutally violent and repressive societies of the 20th century, Hitler's Germany, which is a rightist society, Stalin's USSR, a leftist society, Khomeini's Iran, a religious society, and Idi Amin's Uganda, a tribalist society, Eisler saw that despite obvious differences, these societies all shared the same dominator blueprint based on ranking and domination. From Eisler's perspective, quote, "One core element of this dominator blueprint is authoritarianism, strongman rule in both the family and the state or tribe. A second is rigid male dominance, the ranking of one half of humanity over the other half. A third is socially accepted violence, from child and wife beating to chronic warfare. A fourth core element is a set of teachings and beliefs that dominator relationships are inevitable, even moral, that it's honorable and moral to kill and enslave neighboring nations or tribe, that stone women to death, stand by while inferior races are put in ovens and gassed, or beat children to impose one's will," unquote. On the other hand, partnership cultures are based on linking instead of ranking and exhibit democratic social and family structures, gender equality, and low levels of violence. Eisler emphasizes that partnership cultures are not entirely flat societies in which everyone does whatever they want to do. Partnership cultures have hierarchies and clear lines of responsibility, but they are characterized by mutual aid rather than intimidation or force. Partnership cultures do not have competition, but rather than being partnership cultures do have competition, but rather than being cutthroat, it is achievement-oriented. Modern cultures close to the partnership model include present-day Scandinavian nations, which, although not perfect, have pioneered the first peace academies, laws against child beating, and social policies that support caregiving and environmentally sound manufacturing processes. These nations, Eisler points out, quote, "are regularly at the top of the UN National Quality of Life charts. These more partnership-oriented societies offer living proof that a more peaceful and equitable way of life is possible," unquote. Eisler reported this research in her book, The Chalice and the Blade, which was published in 1987 and quickly became an international bestseller. The book has been translated into 22 different languages and was praised by Los Angeles Weekly as the most significant work published in our lifetimes. The book is now in 57 U.S. printings and 27 foreign editions. The book's success was mirrored in Eisler's personal life as she married social psychologist and futurist David Loy, and together they started the Center for Partnership Studies. Referring to their partnership-oriented marriage, Eisler beamed, quote, "I speak from experience when I say partnership works," unquote. One focus of the Center for Partnership Studies, now called Center for Partnership Systems, is applying the partnership model to the field of education. Eisler's system of partnership education incorporates nonviolent conflict resolution, multiculturalism, gender balance, ethics, and environmental sensitivity to all subjects and school policies, thereby offering students what she calls, quote, "an experiential education in democracy. We owe it to them through partnership education to give them a more complete, more accurate, and yes, more hopeful picture of what being human can mean," unquote. Another aspect of Eisler's work is the important connection between violence in the home and violence in the world. She declares, quote, "Intimate violence and international violence are as tightly bound together as the fingers of a clenched fist," unquote. From her perspective, intimate violence such as child abuse, rape, and spousal abuse damaged not only the direct victims, but also society as a whole. Eisler explains, quote, "The UN reports that violence against women and children is the most widespread human rights violations worldwide. The ranking of male over female is a basic model children learn early on for equating differences with superiority and inferiority, which is then generalized to different races, religions, and ethnicities," unquote. Eisler also notes that when children are abused or see their mothers being abused, they learn that it is acceptable for those who are stronger to impose their will through violence. In addition, experiencing or witnessing such abuse causes the children's brains to develop fight or flight or disassociation patterns, putting them at greater risk for violent behavior later in life. Quote, "No one is born an abusive person. No child is born a terrorist. Intimate violence is a school for violence, and we don't have to continue to have these schools," unquote. To spotlight this issue, Eisler co-founded with Nobel Peace Laureate Betty Williams the Spiritual Alliance to End Intimate Violence, called SAIV, whose mission is to stop intimate violence, the training ground for violence of war, terrorism, and political repression and crime. Members of the council include such dignitaries as Ella Gandhi, Deepak Chopra, Jane Goodall. Desmond Tutu was on the council until his death in 2021. Riane Eisler received the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation's Distinguished Peace Leadership Award in 2009. She is the current president of the Center for Partnership Systems, editor-in-chief of the Interdisciplinary Journal of Partnership Studies, and distinguished professor at Meridian University, which offers PhD and master degrees based on Eisler's partnership domination social scale. She lost her second husband, David Loy, in January 2022 to COVID. From carefree child to enemy of the state to best-selling author and scholar, Dr. Riane Eisler has transformed personal tragedy into social benefit, offering a new understanding of humanity's past, renewed hope for its potential future, a future when, in Eisler's words, quote, chronic violence, inequality, and insensitivity will no longer be just the way things are, but the way things once were. We will now see a short video of Riane and a few more famous quotes, and then we'll be followed by a song. And this song is one that people say they don't know, so we're going to make sure in the next few months that you learn this song called Spirit of Life.
Take, for example, the commonly used economic indicators, which are used by policymakers. Gross domestic product, GDP, gross national product, GNP. Now, if actually, objectively speaking, if the consequences weren't so serious, these would be funny. Because, consider, what is included as productive work, as these are measures, by the way, of economic fitness, they say, economic health. They include activities that actually harm and take life. Making cigarettes, the health bills, medical bills, the funeral bills are terrific for GDP. Not only do they include as positives, negatives, but they fail to include as economically productive work the most essential human activities, without which none of us would be here, the life-sustaining activities. The work of caring and caregiving in households, it isn't included. Not only that, the life-sustaining activities of nature aren't there either. The only value that an old stand of trees has is when it's cut. But the fact that we wouldn't be having air to breathe without these old trees, it doesn't figure in. So obviously, we need to change. And by the way, some people are going to say, well, how can you quantify this? You can quantify it to a very large extent. I'll give you one example, the Swiss, which is not exactly the most radical society in the world. They have for years been doing satellite accounts in which they have been measuring the value of the work, the unpaid work in households, mostly, as I said, this women's work. And they found that if that work were included, it would amount to 70%, 70% of the reported Swiss GDP. So obviously, we've got to change things. And we've got to really change them. Not only, we need an economic model that includes the household economy, that includes the natural economy, as well as just the market economy. But even in the market economy, what we see is bizarre. In these United States, for example, people think nothing. Well, see, the professions that don't entail caring and caregiving, engineering, plumbing, uniformly are higher paid than those that do, like childcare, elementary school teaching. That doesn't mean that caring men, it's usually men, aren't plumbers or engineers, but the work of caring and caregiving isn't. So people think nothing of paying a plumber, the person to whom we entrust our pipes, $50 to $90 an hour. But the person to whom we entrust our children, the child care workers, according to the US Department of Statistics, an average of $10 an hour and no benefits. And we insist that the plumber be trained. How could we entrust our pipes to someone who isn't? But we do not insist that all child care workers be trained. So obviously this is not logical, it's pathological.